I heard her say it with my own ears. No one cares if you croak, Harold. Just die already. The words sliced through the dark hallway like ice through bone. I wasn't meant to hear it, but I did. And in that moment, something inside me, what little hadn't already rotted from disease, fractured forever. My name is Harold Whitaker. I'm 68 years old, and I've been battling ALS for the past 2 years. I can no longer move my legs, my hands tremble like dry leaves in the wind, and I speak in short, breathy whispers. Once I was a proud man, a factory foreman, a father, a husband. Now I'm something else. A shadow, a burden. But let me tell you something before this story begins. That sentence, those 12 venomous words, weren't just my death sentence. They were her beginning of the end. It all began 2 weeks after I was discharged from St. John's Medical Center. The doctors said there wasn't much more they could do. The disease was progressing fast. I wouldn't walk again. Eating would become harder. Breathing a struggle. They gave me 3 months, maybe less. Margaret, my wife of 35 years, stood beside me at the hospital bed, stroking my hand and nodding solemnly. But there was a flatness in her eyes, a dull, checked-out sort of stare, as if she were watching the closing credits of a film she didn't like. When we got home, she did her duties at first. She wheeled me to the bathroom, helped with the feeding tube, called the nurse on schedule. But as the days wore on, something began to shift. She sighed more. Her hands grew rougher. Her smiles vanished altogether. Then came that night. She thought I was asleep in the bedroom, and maybe I would have been if the pain hadn't woken me. The medication had worn off early. I was wheeling myself toward the hallway to get her attention when I heard it. "I'm not doing this for long, John. He's practically dead already. No one cares if he croaks." My breath caught. I froze. She was on the phone. With a man. A man named John. And from the way her voice softened when she said his name, from the flirtation in her laugh, I knew this wasn't a new development. I backed away silently, trembling more from heartbreak than illness. My chest felt hollow. My wife, the woman who once cradled my face on our wedding night, had just spoken of my death as if I were a pet goldfish too old to bother with. I returned to my bed, silent, cold. But as the rage simmered beneath my trembling skin, an idea was already beginning to form. If no one cared whether I croaked, then maybe I had nothing left to lose. Margaret wasn't always like this. I remember the woman I married, her wild red hair pinned under a flower crown, laughing so hard during our vows that the priest had to stop and wait. We were poor, but she made every dollar stretch like magic. She made our little apartment feel like a palace. We had our share of hardships, sure. I worked double shifts and she stayed home with our daughter, Sarah. She always said, "Harold, if we have love, we have enough." And for a long time, I believed her. But something shifted over the years, slowly, subtly. At first, it was little things, Margaret sighing when I forgot to put the trash out, her sharp tongue when I was late for dinner. Then came the years of silence after Sarah moved to another state and stopped visiting. We both handled the loneliness differently. I buried myself in work. She retreated into bitterness. Still, I never imagined she'd turn into someone so callous, so cruel. When I was first diagnosed with ALS, she cried. I remember her crumpling onto the floor next to the hospital bed, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Don't leave me, Harold," she had sobbed. "Don't leave me alone." But those tears dried quickly. And after my second fall, when I shattered my hip and became wheelchair-bound, something in her hardened like old bread. She no longer saw me as her partner. I became a chore, an expense. A body she had to keep from dying too soon, just not out of love. She started staying out late. Said she was taking walks or going to the store, but sometimes she didn't return until after midnight. I tried asking, but she always snapped back. "What do you want me to do, Harold?" stare at you all day. I began noticing details I hadn't before. A strange cologne lingering on her scarf. Unexplained charges on our joint credit card. She smiled more during phone calls she took behind closed doors. Still, I clung to denial. I convinced myself she was just under stress, that the disease was testing her as much as it was breaking me. But after I overheard her talking to John that phone call, I knew the truth. And with that truth came memory. Back when I was still strong, I had once installed a small safe behind the bookshelf in our room. Inside it, I had tucked away things she'd long forgotten about: copies of our joint savings, the original deed to our house in my name only, and an old camcorder I used to record family moments. Now, as I sat in that bed alone, I realized those forgotten relics might just become weapons. I couldn't walk. I couldn't even raise my arms above my chest. But I could still think, still observe, still plan. And if Margaret was done pretending to love me, then I'd stop pretending to be the helpless fool. I became a prisoner in my own home. At first, the changes were subtle. Margaret forgot to plug in my electric wheelchair one night, so I couldn't move in the morning. Another time, she left my pain medication out of reach and claimed she thought the nurse would handle it. I had to press the emergency button just to get someone to come refill my water. I tried telling the visiting nurse Claire about these things, but Margaret always stood in the doorway during her visits, smiling sweetly, hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "He's a little confused these days," she would say. "The meds affect his memory." Claire gave me a pitying glance and moved on. The house became colder, not just in temperature, but in spirit. I started waking up with no blanket. I'd hear her laugh in the living room with someone on speakerphone, never once checking if I needed anything. My meals got smaller. My sheets stayed soiled longer. I was no longer her husband. I was a chore to be avoided. Then one afternoon I heard something I couldn't ignore. Margaret thought I was asleep. But ALS doesn't steal your hearing. I heard her heels click down the hall, her voice suddenly laced with flirtation. Then a low chuckle answered her. A man's voice. "John," she whispered, "just wait till the old man finally croaks. We'll sell the place and move to the coast. You and me, baby." I couldn't breathe, not because of the illness, but because of the weight crushing my chest. She wasn't waiting for me to die. She was counting on it. That evening, when they were downstairs drinking wine, I used what little strength I had to roll across the room. Inside my closet was the old storage box labeled Christmas lights. But it held something else, a dusty, barely functioning voice-activated recorder I once used for my job. It took me 20 minutes to position it under my pillow, and another 10 to mask it with a folded towel so she wouldn't see the blinking light. My fingers trembled the entire time, but I did it. Over the next week, I let it run. I smiled when she entered. I pretended not to notice the venom in her voice. But every night I switched out the batteries with the last of my strength. And every night it caught her, laughing with John, complaining about how much money I was costing her, how much easier life would be when I finally croaked. On the 7th night, she crossed the line. "Do you think if I skip one of his meds, it'll speed things up?" She giggled. That was it. I stared at the ceiling for hours that night, tears soaking into the pillow. But not from sadness. Those were tears of resolve, of focus, of rage finding its purpose. She wanted me gone, she'd get her wish, but not before hearing everything I had to say. That night, as the house slept in silence and shadows, I began writing my goodbye. But not the kind my wife might expect. Using my voice-to-text device, I dictated word by word into the tablet Claire had helped set up months ago. Each breath felt like a battle, but rage kept me going. I had one mission now: to speak the truth, even if I wouldn't be there to see the aftermath. The message began with a gentle tone for Sarah, my daughter. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 4 years. Margaret always claimed she was too busy or that hearing about your decline would only depress her. Now I knew better. "Sarah," I rasped, "if you're hearing this, it means I'm no longer here. But you deserve to know why." I told her everything. The disease, the pain, but more importantly, what was happening in our house. The recordings, the affairs, the neglect. I included audio clips extracted from the recorder and inserted into the video message with Claire's earlier tech lessons. My fingers were too weak to edit them myself, so I used an AI program to sync everything. Technology had become my greatest ally. I explained the financials, too. The house was in my name. The joint savings account had a clause withdrawals over a certain amount required dual consent. And the insurance policy. It had one last caveat. Margaret had forgotten the beneficiary could be revoked online by voice command, and that's exactly what I did. I named Sarah as the sole recipient. Everything I had left, every dollar, every account would go to her. Margaret, she'd get nothing, not a dime, not even my ashes. Finally, I ended the message with a camera shot of myself, pale, thin, shaking, but smiling. I may not live long, Margaret, I said, addressing her directly for the first time in the recording. But you will live much longer with what you did. Then I saved the video, uploaded it to the cloud, scheduled it to auto-send to Sarah's email and a USB Claire had secretly helped me drop off at the local pastor's office just in case. And then I waited. Over the next 2 days, Margaret barely spoke to me. She was too busy texting John, cooking only for herself, and complaining over the phone to someone I didn't recognize. I swear, he's taking forever to die. But I didn't respond. Didn't flinch. I just smiled. She took that as a sign that I had finally given up, that death was close, and truthfully it was. My breathing grew labored that night. My fingers had stopped working entirely. I could feel it coming like a slow tide rising over my chest. But as the room dimmed around me, I wasn't afraid, because I knew the message would reach them, and when it did, her knees wouldn't just buckle, they'd shatter. The morning I died, Margaret didn't even check on me. Claire was the one who found me. She'd stopped by earlier than usual, because as she told me the week before, something feels wrong in that house. When she stepped into the bedroom and saw my still body, she knew. She called 911. Then she called Sarah. Margaret, meanwhile, was in the kitchen sipping coffee with the television blaring, completely unaware. When the paramedics left and Claire quietly passed her a sealed envelope, I imagine Margaret rolled her eyes. Maybe even smirked. She'd finally gotten what she wanted, but I had been one step ahead. The next day, a private memorial was held at a small chapel on the edge of town. Margaret insisted on a modest service, more to be seen grieving than out of any love. She invited just enough people to create the illusion of sorrow, wore a black veil, cried on cue, until the pastor paused mid-sermon and said, "There's something Harold asked us to play." A technician wheeled in a screen. Lights dimmed, and my face appeared. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, but a stare sharp as broken glass. "Hello, everyone," I said, voice raspy but steady. "If you're seeing this, I'm gone. But before you mourn or pretend to, I want you to know the truth." The crowd fell silent. Margaret froze. Then the video played. Clip after clip, her voice dripping venom laughter with John whispers of skipping meds. She said I was just a body, I narrated. But I was listening. I heard every word. People gasped. Some turned to look at her. Her face turned white. She thought no one cared if I died. But I cared enough to make sure you knew who she really was. Then came the final punch. In my final days, I made some changes. My will, the house, the insurance. Margaret, you'll receive nothing. Sarah, everything is yours now. Because you still called. You still remembered me. The camera zoomed in, and Margaret, you'll live longer than me. But every time you walk into this house, every time you hear your own voice on this tape, I hope you remember what you said to me in the dark. Then I smiled. A tired, peaceful, victorious smile. Goodbye. The screen went black. Margaret didn't move for several seconds. Then, as if someone had pulled the floor from under her, her knees gave out. She collapsed in the middle of the aisle veil, crumpling gasps echoing around her. Sarah, tears streaming down her face, stood from the front pew and walked past her mother without a word. That was the last time they stood under the same roof. I was gone. But I had spoken, and she would never silence that voice again. News of the funeral video spread like wildfire through our town. Margaret tried to do damage control. She claimed the clips were edited, that I was confused, that stress had twisted my perception. But the evidence was overwhelming, raw, undeniable. Voices don't lie. And neither did her face when the truth played in front of everyone. Sarah took immediate action. She flew down that night, collected the house keys from Claire, and served Margaret with the eviction notice 3 days later. I had already prepared the legal groundwork with my lawyer before the end. My will was airtight. "You don't belong here anymore," Sarah told, her eyes like mine, voice steady. Margaret didn't fight. What could she say? That I'd set a trap, that I'd outlived her plan even in death. She left with 2 suitcases and 1 angry phone call to John, who apparently stopped answering once he realized the inheritance had vanished. No love, no money, no future. My old home. It became a place of healing again. Sarah decided to renovate the downstairs into a care center for elderly patients who had no family, support her way of making sure no one else had to die alone, unheard, like she feared I might have. Claire stayed on as a part-time nurse. She and Sarah grew close. I like to imagine them laughing in the garden, tending to the roses Margaret always let wilt. As for my legacy, it lived far beyond the estate. The video I made, Sarah uploaded it to a support forum for ALS caregivers. It went viral. Thousands of people wrote messages thanking me for speaking a truth they'd never dared say out loud. Some called it revenge. Others called it justice. But for me, it was simply freedom. In my final moments, I wasn't a man drowning in silence. I was a voice cutting through it. A broken body, yes, but a mind sharper than ever, and a heart that refused to die quietly. I hope that message echoes in every room Margaret walks into for the rest of her days. And I hope it reminds her, the ones you call burdens might be the ones holding all your secrets. If you've made it this far, I want to leave you with this. Never let anyone decide your worth based on your illness, your age, or your weakness. People like Margaret thrive on silence, on the assumption that the sick can't speak, can't fight back, can't expose the truth. But we can. Even if our bodies fail us, our spirit can still roar. I shared my story not for pity, but for power. For those quietly suffering in their homes. For the elderly being dismissed. For the disabled being overlooked. You are not invisible. And your voice, however faint, still matters. Choose one person to trust. Document everything. And if the time comes, don't go quietly. Go honestly. Because the truth has more strength than any muscle, more bite than any betrayal. Speak it before someone else speaks for you.